Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Motocross Radio. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. This afternoon, our show is brought to you by Vintco, Keep the Ride Going, Preston Petty, The Legend Continues, Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973, and Vintage Motocross Q&A. Watch our show live on Facebook every Wednesday at 6 p.m. My guest today is the creator of the website mxworksbikes.com. He's also the creator and administrator of several Facebook groups that also feature these amazing bikes. He's the author of the book Legendary Motocross Bikes. He's also the proprietor of the International Motocross Museum, which is scheduled to open later this year in Chicago. Roger DeCoster said, "I wanted my bikes and memorabilia to be with someone who would take care of them and keep them together. I wanted them to be in a place where they could be seen by everyone and to be amongst as many other top bikes in the world that raced in world championships as possible, starting with the Norton of Leslie Archer, Sten London's Lido, and on and on. I feel that when it's complete, Terry's museum will be like the Smithsonian of motocross." My guest this afternoon is Terry Good. Terry, are you there?
I am, and thanks for having me, Joe.
You're very, very welcome. Was that introduction appropriate? Did I cover everything?
Yeah, it was. It really was. And I have to say, before we start into all this, your enthusiasm and what you do, I think I really appreciate it. I applaud it. And it's imperative that somebody does this for the history of motocross. It's very important. So thank you, Joe.
Terry, thank you very much. Well, let's get back to the beginning where a young kid in 1972 was riding a Yamaha HS1 in Michigan. I believe that was you, and tell me more about that, Terry. What was that like?
Well, in 1969, my mom and dad bought a summer home up on a lake in the northern part of the lower peninsula of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And we had, it was right on the lake, and it was right adjacent to the Huron National Forest. In fact, they still run a lot of qualifiers, enduro qualifiers up there. They ran the Jack Pine Enduro through there, and I had no idea of this. At that time, I was just a young kid, a guitar player, and we went up there practically every weekend in the summer and the winter, and we had ski boats, snowmobiles. My dad had this Sears 106. It was, he bought it from Sears, obviously, and it was a four-stroke, 106cc, made by Jalera, and then Sears and Roebuck put their badge on it, and you know that was it. They sold them through their stores. So my dad bought one, and that's the bike I learned how to ride on. And then he got a step-through 50 for my mom, Honda. And so my dad and I would go in the trails and ride on all these famous trails, and it was great for a father and son relationship. And then he bought me this HS1 Yamaha, which was a twin-cylinder street bike. And the reason he bought it for me was it had all this chrome on it, and it looked really cool. And I actually have one now just like it, and it does look cool, but it's not the best bike for the trails.
Sure.
And so then we sold that, and we got a 175 Enduro. And while all this was going on, I started getting motorcycle magazines and reading them, and the guys I read about were, you know, Joel Robert and Roger DeCoster, and the Suzukis were coming out, and just, I mean, that was... If you were going to be at the right place at the right time, that was definitely it.
It sure was. It sure was. And on that little 175, you actually entered your first motocross race in a 250 class.
I did. There was a track up there. It was by an organization called Dirt Inc. Mm-hmm. And I kept hearing about it. And it was in Oscoda, Michigan. And it was an old military bombing range. I mean, you'd go there and there'd be 50 caliber machine gun shells and clips all over the place. And there was this 3-mile sand track that to this day is the roughest track I've ever ridden on. And I heard they were having a race Memorial Day weekend in 1972. And so I stripped down my 175 Enduro, got a Webco expansion chamber for it, put a high fender on it. It still had the Trials tires. That was it. And I begged my dad to take me there to let me race because of all these magazines I read. I just wanted to try it out.
Sure.
So I went there to sign up, and they go, look, you got to ride in the 250 class. So, okay, I just want to race, So we signed up, and, it was a tough deal going around a track that rough on a 175 Enduro. But I did it, and I ended up getting a 15th, which, considering all things, was... Anyway, I was bit by the bug, and it just went... I don't know if that was a good day or a bad day of my life, but here I am now. So,
yeah. And you know what, Terry? It was the beginning, and you remembered it, and you didn't get hurt, and that's what's really important about the beginning of these things. You continued on racing different bikes, and at 18 years old, it's 1975. You had toiled for minimum wage as a construction worker, but you managed to save some money to buy a van and put that YZ250 in there, and you dreamed what almost all of us kids who don't live in California, you did what we all dreamed of. You loaded up that van with that bike, and you went out to the West Coast, the mecca of motocross. What was it like when you got here, and what do you remember about it?
Oh, man, that's one of those things. I mean, that is one of the absolute highlights of my life was that first day I got to Saddleback Park.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even believe I was there. And I had planned with another guy in the summer of 1974, and we were going to go there. And this was a guy I went to high school with. I had graduated high school in 74. So let's go to California next year. And, Indian Dunes, Saddleback, Carlsbad, all those tracks, Orange County Cycle, everything you read about and dreamed about. And I've always been a dreamer. And so about a month, we decided to go in the beginning of 1975, the beginning of summer. So it was actually 45 years ago on May 29th that I left.
Well, you remember that day very well, don't you?
I do. I do remember that day. And my buddy backed out at the last minute, and like a month before, and I'm like, unbelievable. Now what? And I was like, I'm not staying here. I was always, if you're going to think, you got to think big. That's what I've always thought.
Sure.
And I raced all the time in Michigan. I did really well, and was real happy with it. A lot of nice people. But I wanted to go out there where the action was and just see what happened. So I went to Saddleback, and I got there, and I was just in total awe. I signed up 250 Pro class and went out and practiced, and I was just shocked at how fast these guys were. It was unbelievable. I got passed by everybody. And thank God I got a flat tire in practice so I didn't race, because I would have gotten dead last.
Who were some of the guys in that race, Terry? Do you remember?
Yeah, Tim Hart. He was on a 250 factory Yamaha with the Profab frame and all that. I remember Rich Eierstad was there. I'm not sure about Pierre Carsmakers. He might have been there. He would have been on a Honda probably. And then there's these guys, like... There's so many guys out there, I learned this all later, there's so many guys that they're not national names, and they were just as fast as the factory guys.
Yeah.
So it was a rude awakening, and that was my first, but I was just in awe of the place, absolute awe of the majesty of the track. It was so cool.
Well, you actually did hold a professional motocross license at one time. I've seen pictures of you. In fact, I have it in our slideshow here. It's a black and white picture. There's a picture of you lined up. I think it's in Delta, Ohio. You're on the line there with Marty Smith and Danny Laporte. So when you did manage to get up to that level and qualify for a race like that, how did you fare in those times?
Well, I did really work hard at the races, and I lived in Orange County. A family took me in. I was just this lone, I didn't know anybody when I went out there. I saved up $900, and that May 29th I told my mom, I said, I am going to California. And they did, they were trying to talk me out of it. And I was out there alone, and this family I met at Saddleback, the Applings, Glenn Appling. Warren Reed knows them very well, too. And I went out there, and I was walking through the pits that first day I was there, and Little Glenn's 250YZ was on fire in the pits there, and I helped them put it out by putting dirt on it and all that. And so they invited me into their house and everything, and they kind of took care of me. They fed me, and I was just an orphan.
Wow.
And they were very nice people. And so I raced all those races out there and just worked and worked and worked. And we would go down to Newport Beach and run from 19th Street down to the Balboa Peninsula all the way to the end and back at night. And I just trained and worked at it, and then I got my CMC Pro license, and I met, obviously by now I was a regular at all these CMC races, and I met a friend of mine, Kim Blackseth, who was out there also. He was from Northern California, and he moved down there to get fast. Everybody went there to get fast, because that was the big leagues. And the difference between, if you won in Michigan and then went to Saddleback, like I did, you would get lapped.
Yeah. Now, Terry, what bike were you riding back then? I think you were a Yamaha guy in those days.
Yeah. So when I rode the 125 Nationals, I rode a 1976 YZ 125X, the one with the canisters, and I actually liked that bike a lot. And Brock Glover was on the DG Honda, and his dad, Dick Glover, was driving the DG truck. And so I got to be friends with his dad. In fact, we were real good friends, and his dad kind of took me under his wing a little bit. My friend Kim Blackseth had to go back home because his had issues with his mom, and so I was on my own on the Nationals, and Brock's dad gave me a DG pipes, the Martech ignition, special cylinder, and my bike was just a rocket ship. So it was really cool. But I have to be honest, for me to even qualify at one of those things, it was a major accomplishment.
Yeah.
There were many times I did not qualify, and when I did, those were 40-minute motos plus 2 laps. That's some serious stuff, and I would get in the 20s or something like that.
Just to qualify and just to be there and experience what that was like. So many young guys didn't get a chance to do that, and you were able to do it. Now, according to the little bit of research that I've done, I guess that went on not too much longer, because it said that you were married in 1977 and you actually moved to California.
That's right. I had Blackseth went back to California, up in Oakland. That's where he was from.
Yeah.
So he went up there, and my dad owned this apartment complex, and so I met this lady that was cleaning my apartment, this girl, and she was, I was not a very well kept person, so I'd have my bike in there and his tire tracks. Anyway, my cleaning lady ended up becoming my wife, and she knew what she was getting into, that I was into all this. And so I was originally going to race the Nationals in 77, and we got married in March of 77. And then after, we got married and all that, I said, let's just go to California and start over and see what happens.
Sure.
So that's what we did. And I started out in the union as a first period apprentice, making $5 an hour, and I worked my way up to the #1 foreman with the largest framing company in Orange County. We lived in Santa Ana in a little dumpy apartment, $165 a month, and that was it. And but I kept, I'd race occasionally here and there, and then I took the test, to get a contractor's license, and I got my license, and I was in my early 20s, and I was a commercial framer.
I see.
So we did commercial framing, and I built 5 shopping centers in Palm Springs, all over Los Angeles, medical centers, banks, Orange County, all over the place. And I had up to 40 guys working for me, and we were just booming. And so I was, you kind of grow up, and I was raising a family. I had 2 kids now, and they were both born in Fountain Valley, right off the 405 freeway there. And so my priorities were changing. But yeah, that's how that all that.
Let's back up a moment here too, because from that framing business, you had a friend and you went to his house one afternoon. One thing leads into the next, and he's got an old Yamaha laying there that he claims has an interesting history, and we've all heard that story before. But it actually did have an interesting history, and you bought this bike for $650. Tell us about that bike.
That was okay. I was already this was in 77. So I'm working for $5-6 an hour. Glenn Appling, they were the family that took me in, called me up one day and he said, "Hey, there's a national road race at Riverside Raceway. You want to go to it?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So he came and picked us up, me and my wife, and we drove out to Riverside Raceway, and we watched Kenny Roberts, and, it's just awesome to be there and all that. Anyway, on the way home, he says, "Hey, do you mind if I stop by a friend of mine's house on the way home?" I said, "No problem." So we pull into Box Springs Canyon. It's right near the road race track up there. And we went there. We go to this guy's house, and his name is Ron Crandall. And he was the guy, and I didn't know him, never heard of him. He was the guy that ran Corona Raceway. Okay. And then later he became an AMA ref. And so went in his house, met him and his wife, and we're just standing in the kitchen there. And I look out the kitchen window, and there's a detached garage in the backyard. And there's this Yamaha this motorcycle leaning up against it. I look at it closer, and I go, "God, that looks like a factory Yamaha." And so I asked him about it, and he says, "Yeah, that was Pierre Carsmaker's bike." And then he goes, "And Bob Hanna rode it later." And I said to him, I go, "Do you mind if I go outside and look at it?" And he goes, "No, not at all." So I go outside by myself, and I'm staring at this thing, and everything's titanium on it, special profab frame, the magnesium triple clamps, titanium kickstart. Everything was a full-blown factory bike. And I went back in the house, and I said, "What are you going to do with it, or what do you do with that thing?" And he goes, "Oh, we put a paddle tire on it. We take it out the Dumont Dunes and out there. And sometimes I let some guys race it at night races at Corona." And I said to him, I go, "Would you ever consider selling it?" And he goes, No, I got it from the president of Yamaha, Terry Tiernan." Right.
Did that make sense? Does that story check out to you?
Yeah, it did. Okay. That part. The Bob Hanna part I didn't believe, because it was a 74. Yeah. And Bob Hanna didn't sign with Yamaha till the end of 75. Right. And Bob Hanna was the big thing in 1977, and so I didn't believe that part, but I didn't say anything, and but I knew it was a factory Yamaha, and I'm sure it was Pierre Carsmaker's bike. And so anyway, I asked him for his phone number, and then we went back home, and I just kept calling him, and he kept telling me no, and I just kept thinking about that bike, and I called him so many times, and he just kept saying no, and I almost forgot about it. It was just like, this isn't going to happen, get over it and move on, that kind of thing. Yeah. And all of a sudden, one day he called me up. And I don't have much money, and I'm not making much money, and we're 78, so we had one kid by then. Mm-hmm. And so I got responsibility here. And he calls me up one day at night, and he says, "Listen, I'll sell you the bike. I'm going to give you one shot at it, $650. Come on over here with the cash tonight, or don't ever call me again." And I had a 280Z Datsun. I didn't have a van anymore. I had this 280Z, and the bank's going to close. It's dark. It's in the wintertime. The bank's going to close in like 15 or 20 minutes, and I don't know how I'm going to get that. and I had probably $700 in the bank. So I go to the bank, take out the $650, and I have no idea how I'm going to do this. And I was even going to lift up the hatch and shove the bike in the 280Z just to get it if I had to. But I remembered a good friend of mine who I've known forever, George Earl, who owned Uptight Husqvarna in Santa Ana. And that shop was probably a mile and a half from my house at that time, apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So I called George and I go, George, you got to help me out here. I need to borrow your van tonight. And I told him the story and he said, no problem. So I went and got the bike. And when I got there, not only did it was raining so hard, you could not see 25 feet in front of the van. I was driving down the 91 freeway, like at 10 miles an hour all the way. And I got to the guy's house and all of a sudden, we're looking at the bike. I give him the money and he goes, well, let's dig all this other stuff up here. It's up in the attic here in his garage. And so there's a whole nother bike up there. Same thing, only an open class. And then all in pieces. And then there was a brand new OW25 engine that was Bob Hanna's. And that was up there.
Oh, man.
So we loaded the whole thing in the van. And I was just, I couldn't even believe it happened. And that was the start of this whole thing.
That's an absolutely incredible story. Now, Terry, from the research I've done, I couldn't quite fill in the gap between how the framing business ended and how you got into the financial market. How did that happen?
Well, back then, I didn't even know that futures markets existed. I didn't even know what they were, let alone the open outcry in a trading pit where, there's several hundred guys in this trading pits just screaming and shouting, and it looks like they're fighting for their lives in there. And somehow I bought I bought 100-ounce bar of silver. Mm-hmm. I was making good money back then, and I bought 100-ounce bar of silver for, I don't know what it was, but that was when the Hunt brothers, the whole silver market, probably not many people know about that, but silver went way up, interest rates went way up because of inflation and all that.
Yes.
And so I bought a 100-ounce bar of silver, and I just started watching the silver market. And I opened up a trading account and started trading. Now I'm finding out all this stuff. They're futures markets. What are they? And so I started learning about it. And then I had a broker in Century City. So I'd get up every morning at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive into Century City to trade the foreign currencies. They opened at 7? Well, I don't know what time they opened up there. 5:20. And so I'd trade I got into trading, and then they'd have these commercials, and they would show different brokers, and they'd have scenes of the trading floor and all that. And it just enamored me that, God, look at that, and I never knew this. And so that year, that was 1983, there was a massive bull market in the grains, a huge drought. And I just happened, by now I'm trading everything. And I was actually making a little bit of money, not much, but making it. And I accidentally bought the low and sold the high of a massive bull market in soybeans.
Okay.
I made about $80,000 in a couple months, trading very small, and it was just pot luck in all fairness. But so that, I was like, whoa, that got my attention. So I asked my broker, I said, can you arrange for me to get an appointment on the floor of the trading floor of the Board of Trade in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange? Mm-hmm. And so they did that, and I flew back to Chicago and stayed at a hotel, got a cab, went to the exchange, and went down on the floor for this appointment. And I have to tell you, before I went down on the floor, I went up in the visitors gallery. My parents met me. They live in Detroit.
Right.
We went up the elevator to the visitors gallery, the 4th floor. And when that elevator door opened, you could just hear the roar of that. I couldn't even believe it. And right then and there, without seeing anything, I said to my mom and dad, I said, I'm selling my house, I'm selling everything, and I'm going to come back here and give this a shot.
And
And
you did.
and I did.
And you had incredible success there on the exchange, but you never lost your love for motocross and all things about it. And you took some of your money at that time and you actually built your own bike, sponsored a rider, and you pursued becoming an importer for Mugen and for Technicell.
Yeah, I did. But the success on the exchange wasn't as easy
As I
I
make it
was.
sound.
Oh man, I almost lost when I got in there and first went in the pit. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what have I done?"
Right.
These guys were the most competitive. It was kill or be killed,
Every
and
day.
these guys were the most vicious. You're standing in there, and they would slit their mother's throat for a tick. I mean, it was tough, and I was down to my last $9,000, and I went there with the money I'd saved up and all that. I never sold the works bike or the Mugen, and I went in there, and it was tough and brutal, and every day and the pushing and shoving, it was nuts. So, but it was cool. And I was down to my last $9,000, and I remember thinking, God, I'm out of here. I got to move back to California. And it was just a failure. And so I walked around the exchange. I was practically in tears. And I says, the only guy that's going to get out of this is you. You better pick up yourself by the bootstraps and get back in there. And you put your pants on just like those guys do.
Yeah.
So I'm not kidding you. I went back in there, started trading, started going with, the flow and, taking profits and trying to cut my losses and, stick up for myself a lot more than I did and all that. And from that day, I made $500,000 in 6 months.
In 6 months, you made $500,000.
I made $500,000.
God bless America.
Yeah, that's right. And I knew because I've seen guys in there make and lose millions.
Yeah.
Fast, real fast. I've seen got heart attacks in there. I've seen just carnage.
Yeah.
And then later I learned that over 95% of the people that get involved in that go broke. And I had no idea those were the statistics. I would have never done it. But anyway, that's what happened. And it didn't go straight up from there, but I did well. And I learned to be very disciplined. And but in 1989, my son, getting back to how I started on the line racing, my 2-year-old son got a real serious illness, aplastic anemia, and they didn't think he was going to. They thought he had about 6 months to live, and all that. And I went, to go back to work and face these guys every day with that in the back of your mind. It was tough, and I was losing every trade was a loser, and so I said, I got to take some time off. So I took some time off to be with my son and all that, and I started that business as a hobby, kind of, as something to fill in where I didn't have to focus so hard, and I thought the best way to get attention from everyone was either to do a ton of advertising or to build a really trick shock and awe motorcycle that everyone would know us by. And that's how that aluminum frame 250 got into being.
Okay.
And I sponsored Ty Davis, and I went with him as a mechanic to all the races. We had a lot of fun, although I'm not a good mechanic. And that's how that happened. And I became the Technicell importer. I'm very good friends to this day with Vito, Roberto, and Leo from Milan. Been there many times. Just great people. In fact, Roberto was here last Thanksgiving. So and then Hirotashi Honda.
Yeah.
I got to be. How I met him is in 1980, and this is how I got my Mugen. My 1980 125 Mugen. Yeah. I was the first guy to order one of those. There was a Golden State Series, 1980 CMC Golden State Series, and there was a round at Indian Dunes. And so my wife and I decided to go there as a spectator, and we got there right around practice. And so we go out by the track on practice, and here's this white bike that looks like it's from Star Wars or something going around the track, and the guy that's riding it is hauling. And I'm like, what the heck? It didn't even sound like a regular bike. So I look at it, and it comes around, and it's got this weird noise to it, and he's just flying down, everywhere. And we followed him through the pits, and it was Johnny O'Mara.
Okay.
And we find his pit. Al Baker's there working on the bike, and probably Tom Halverson. I think Tom Halverson was his mechanic at the time. And there's a big crowd around his pit, and everyone's staring at that bike. And Johnny's sitting in a lawn chair by the van, and there's this Japanese guy over there kind of hanging out in there. I didn't know who he was, and so I'm staring at it too, and I wonder how you could get one of these things if they're for sale or what the heck it is.
Yeah.
It had all this Japanese writing on the side. It said Mugen. I didn't know what that was. So anyway, I waved to the Japanese guy to come over, and I started asking him questions. And he goes, yeah, the bike will be for sale starting tomorrow. And so I said, I'll take one. And I didn't have the money or anything.
How much?
Know how I was gonna...
Terry, how much was that bike in 1980?
$4,000.
Whoa.
And I probably had a YZ125. That's what I was riding at the time, 1980 YZ1. So that was about $950, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that Mugen was $4,000. And I just said, I'll take it. And he goes, well, they'll be available in 3 months. You have to send us $1,000 deposit.
Right.
And you'll be on the list. And they go on sale tomorrow. And then he hands me his card. And I look at his business card, and his name's Hirotashi Honda. And I was just like, oh. I go, are you related? Yes, I'm the son. I'm like, oh, my, how cool is that?
Yeah.
So then we started talking even more, and that's how I became friends with him. And I ordered the very first bike, and I sent him $1,000 the next day to Al Baker, and it took about 6 months. The bike didn't get there till August, I believe. Mm-hmm. And this Golden State race was in February, so it took a while. And I went up and picked it up there in Hesperia. That's where up there in the high desert, and that's where the thing was. And oh God, it was unbelievable.
You still own that bike, Terry, don't you?
I do, and it only has about 5 hours of runtime on it. I raced it at Saddleback once, De Anza, in a night race, and for the life of me, I can't remember. And maybe Ascot. Okay. And I was rear-ended on the 5 freeway by a semi going 55 when I was stopped.
Oh.
And so I was in physical therapy for a year and a half, and the racing thing was done. So the bike became a collector's item. Well,
Terry, let's get right back now to where another one of your amazing bikes in your collection, and it's of course the Joe Robert Championship bike, his 6th World Championship that he won on.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about when you got that bike and how that came about.
Well, that to me was the holy grail of anything at that time. And, through on-the-line racing, I met a lot of people that had bikes and parts and stuff like that. And so I started buying those, and just as a collector. And, I was getting them relatively cheap, and nobody wanted them. And so I'd buy, this and that, and I had a collection of bikes, but I always thought that if I could find that would be it, and that I would never buy another bike. I mean, I didn't even care if I had another bike after that. So anyone I would talk to on the phone, I would always ask them about one of those work Suzukis. And I didn't care if it was Joel's or anybody's. I just wanted one of them. And well, back then, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have cell phones the way they are now, and phone calls were expensive. And in my quest to collect these bikes, my phone bills in the early 90s, middle 90s, was about $3,000 a month.
Whoa.
Yes, it really was. And but that's what it took, and I developed a really good network and all that. And I was calling to buy, I called Mark Banks. He's the son of the famous GP rider, John Banks.
Okay.
And John was a Mugen importer in the UK, and Mark rode the Pro-Link Mugen and was actually a very good rider. And he was selling his bike, and it was hammered. So a friend of mine gave me Mark's phone number. I called him up. We worked out the deal on the Mugen. And then I said to him, I go, the same question I routinely ask, always expecting the word no, but hoping for a yes. Have you ever seen one of those work Suzukis, like Joel Robert and, from 72? And
Yeah.
not only have I seen them, I've ridden them, both of them. I was like, what? And so he told me the whole story, how the importer of the UK for Suzuki had them. They were at a show in London in November or December of 72, and that they had them. And the only problem is Graham Beamish doesn't live there anymore. He lives in Spain, and he owns a restaurant down there. So somehow or another, I tracked down Graham Beamish in Spain.
Yeah.
Called him. He said, yep, I've got them. He said, we tried to restore one of them, and it was a mess. And the other one, they're not in great shape, but I've got them. How much you want for them? I'll take them both. And he, told me how, I think it was 10,000 pounds. So at the time, that would have been 15,000 each.
Right.
And I just said, I'll take them. And my friend, Clive Bussey, he wanted one. And so I said, all right, Clive, you live there. You pick what you want, and I'll take the other one. He picked the 370. I picked the 250. I got the 250, and that was fine. And so Clive he drove down, 3-hour drive down to Brighton where they were, right by the sea there.
Yeah.
And he was going to take pictures of them with a disposable Kodak camera, those little cardboard ones.
Sure.
And send me the camera, DHL, and then I was going to see the pictures. So he goes down there, takes these pictures, and he calls me back when he gets home really early in the morning. He'd been up all night doing this. He calls me up, and he just sounded like one of his family members died or something.
Wow.
And I go, what's wrong? I go, did you see him? And he goes, yeah. Well, are they real? Oh yeah, they're the real deal. All right.
So what's the problem?
He goes, the 250 is at least together, and it looks like it's been at the bottom of the ocean for the last 10 years. And he goes, the 370 is in disarray. It's not even together. And he goes, to be honest with you, my stomach sunk when I saw him, and I'm not sure I'm going to want the 370. I wasn't even remotely discouraged by that. I go, fine, I'll take them. He goes, well, I had the pictures developed, and I'll send them to you. Well, the day before that, DeCoster called me and invited me to the Fox Theater in Detroit, where he was being inducted to the Motorsports Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And I was his honored guest there, me and this car dealer friend of his. So the pictures were going to get to a photo, or they were going to get to me the next morning, DHL. It cost a fortune to have those things sent, but I wanted Roger to see them. And I got the pictures. I saw what he meant, and they were they were in bad shape, but still they're all there. So I hopped on a plane, flew to Detroit, met Roger there, and we're at the Fox Theater right before the proceedings and all that. And Roger, I go, hey, I got to show you something. Remember that bike I told you I was looking for and found? And he goes, yeah. And by the way, Roger said there's no way they exist. I pulled them out of my pocket. I had a sport jacket on. I pulled them out of my top pocket there, and I showed them to him. And right next to Roger is Jackie Stewart, the Formula One driver.
Yeah.
And he looks at him, and his jaw hit the floor. He couldn't even believe it.
Rogers or Stewart?
Huh?
Rogers' jaw or Stewart?
Both of them eventually, but first Roger and then Jackie Stewart. And Jackie, give me those. Let me see that. and it was so cool. And so from the time I found out about it and talked to Graham Beamish in Spain to the time I wired the money and I had a guy pick up the Mugen and ship both bikes together to Chicago, and they were in my driveway. Was maybe a little over a week.
That was fast.
That was real fast.
Yeah.
And then it took about a year to restore it, and yeah, it cost way more to restore it than it did to buy it. But it's the Holy Grail. It was the real one.
And Terry, it may have cost you more to restore it than it did to buy it, but let's face it, it's certainly worth more than both of those things put together by a long shot. So
that's exactly right. And just a few months ago, I ended up buying the 370 off of Clive.
Who rode the 370 back then?
It's a little debatable. Roger actually believes it was his. Mm-hmm. Joel Robert said it was his, and Joel said, everyone turned the bikes into Nimag, which was in Holland. That was the Suzuki headquarters.
Right.
But Joel went down to Spain to do some motocross schools and had a 250 and a 370, and they came to his house for a motor show in London. Now, who's I don't know. It doesn't matter, but they have serial numbers on them. It's the 250 has definitely been identified as Joel Robert's 250.
Okay. As you can tell, I have my dog with me in the studio today.
Yeah, nice. I love dogs.
Anyway,
we have 5 of them.
Terry, let me ask you this. In 2014, your website stated that you owned 60 bikes. In the past 6 years, how much has that collection grown?
I would say close to doubled. I would say we're pushing 120 now. And this isn't like Joel Robert's bike, and then I got this Wise, production bike over here. These are championship factory bikes, historical pedigree bikes. About 120, let's say.
Now, let me ask you this, and I don't, it seems to me that there's probably going to be several answers to this, but of all the bikes that you've had, very rare, of course, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 only made, what part has been the greatest challenge on any of them that has eluded you? Is there anything that you haven't been able to find a part for, or it took a while to find a part for it?
That's a great question, because these bikes are so one-off back then. They're absolutely handmade. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the bikes would come so different from the other that one pipe on this bike wouldn't fit the other one. So it's really tough. And you either have to make the parts or, find them. And so not only do I buy the bikes, I'll buy all the parts. Like I bought Håkan Andersson's World Championship monoshock bike, the real one. I bought it off of him.
Yes.
And you got any parts for this thing? Yeah, I have lots of parts. So I flew to Sweden and we looked at, and he had loads of parts. Most of them I'll probably never use, but I bought them all. And I have so many parts. First of all, we could probably fill 100,000 square foot warehouse with bikes and parts from what I've collected over the last 42 years. Wow. And it's not junk.
Yeah.
It's all the real HRC, Suzuki, you name it. And so that's been the best source of parts is myself, just simply because I had the wherewithal and I knew to get them because there's no sort. You can't buy them.
Yeah. And when I asked that question, I thought to myself, well, maybe he's going to say, I couldn't find a Kickstarter for an OW or an RH, but you've been buying up parts and you've got a pretty good supply, obviously. So it's all worked out for you. Now, your son plays a big part in the restoration and the refurbishing of these very, very rare bikes. How hands-on are you personally when it comes to the restorations?
Oh boy, I'm not that good at it, and I can do basic things. Like I've got a 250 Works Husky right now. Titanium frame, special sandcast magnesium engine, and it doesn't shift through the gears right now, so the cases have to be split. Okay. There's no way I'm going to do it. I'm not even going to pretend I can almost do it. So Dave Arnold is, he works for me, and he's going to, next time he comes to Chicago for the museum meetings, that's what he's going to be doing. So I get people to do it. And my son, Terry, he just moved to South Carolina, so I'm kind of on my own right now. But he's just a phenomenal mechanic, and where he got his skills is beyond me. It didn't come from me. I'm a total Polak.
So he's been handling it pretty well, and hey, that's great. That some kids pick up musical instruments and you don't know where the heck they got the talent from, and occasionally it does happen to some people that they're blessed with this gift, and your son has apparently had that. So, Terry, in a moment, I'm going to be asking you more about the International Motocross Museum. However, before we get to that, I'd like to read something to you, and it pertains to your recent purchase from the Jones family. And
sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, but before I even say that, I would also like to say that I remember it was at least, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months ago, where you responded to these, I don't want to say allegations, but you responded to certain things on Facebook at length, and explained it in detail about how this deal went down. And yet when I announced the other day that I was going to have you as my guest today, of course the inbox things start coming in of, are you going to ask him about the Jones deal? What went down there? We would like to know this. And look, one person, I'll just say this, and because this is the one that kind of stuck in my mind the most, and you can respond to it. It said just because Terry had the money and the transaction was done legally, morally it was wrong. Now, look, what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, that question is not even relevant to what actually happened. They claim I have all these championship bikes. I don't have any championship bikes.
Okay.
Let me give you a little backstory. Let me back up a little bit. If I got a beef with you,
right,
or anybody else, I'm going to pick up the phone and call you.
Yep.
And then you'll hear my beef, and we can either work it out or we can't. I'm not going to go on the internet or get somebody to write something up for me and then run into a hole and hide. Mm-hmm. I just don't work that way, and who does that? But anyway, here's a little backstory on this. I've known Don Jones. Him and I were like best friends for years. Mm-hmm. I first met him in 1978, but we got to be very close friends in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I've known Belinda Jones, his wife, just as long. And right about at this time is when I decided to, actually Hawk and Anderson, I think, and DeCoster were instrumental in me deciding to take this collection public. And a lot of these guys were egging me on, like Hawken told me about Sten London's World Championship Lido. Mm-hmm. It's like, what's that thing? I don't, one of those. And I wasn't interested in it. He said, you must buy it. You must buy it, Terry. And for the history, it's the most historical. And so so then I started like changing a little bit, so then it was a mission to preserve all this, and all these former champions were all helping me, and here's this over here, Torsten Hallman, DeCoster, all these guys wanted this done, Joel Robert, their legacy preserved, and so I thought, maybe this is, and I had the means to do it. I was successful. I worked for it, though. I took risk.
Yes.
Huge risk. I could have sailed into the sunset, bought second, third homes, and I invested my money in these bikes because of my passion and for my friendship with all these guys. And then, so anyway, that's how that going. But at that same time, Don and I became pretty good friends, and we were calling each other all the time, and we would talk on the phone for 2-3 hours. And I started telling him about, my vision and what I was planning on doing. And he wanted his legacy. He's got a huge legacy that goes way back to his father. Mm-hmm. Don died in 2008 at, I think, 84 years old. And he has his father's bike. And so he's telling me, I said, listen, Don, what do you want to do? And he told me, and he said, and he even told me how he wanted it set up and the whole vision, the basic concept of Jones's exhibit in the museum was going to be a cutaway of Jones motocross.
Is that what you're going to still be doing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So he passed away. His wife knew everything. People say that I just randomly knocked on this 92-year-old woman's widow's door and conned her out of all this stuff. That's ridiculous, and it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's people ranting on. It's the internet. It's social media. So anyway, his wife knew all about this, Melinda, and everything, and she was on board with all of it. The only thing that's not happening that Don wanted to happen was he wanted it in California. And I'm not going back to California. And it's going to happen. And even Melinda, a little bit, well, he really wanted it. No, it's here, and it's with all this great stuff. And basically what we got out of that deal was we wanted, most of it is equipment that was in Jones Motocross in Walnut, California, on Courier Road, that shop. We're replicating that inside this museum, and we've got all the machinery. A guy that used to hang out there all the time met us, and he goes, "This was in there then, this was in there then." And then they found photographs of the shop back then, and so we're going to replicate that inside of the museum, and we're also going to replicate a motorcycle shop. So how it was back in the days. That's what we're trying to do. And Don really wanted his father's white Tohatsu in there. He wanted the 1947 Harley Knucklehead that he took. He took his wife Melinda to the hospital when she was in labor with Dwayne.
Well,
so this is, this all. In fact, when I got there, if there was ever a championship bike, it would have been that 250 Honda Elsinore.
And you don't have that bike?
No.
Okay.
And I don't even believe that was the championship bike. I've never seen an archive photograph with a bike in that configuration anywhere from 73. So that's fine. But that thing was mysteriously missing, the Can-Am and an Amex, and I think I know where they are. But this stuff on me, and if people want to dwell on that, fine.
Terry, I didn't want to even, look, let's put it this way. I had to ask the question. I think the people listening wanted to know about it. Obviously, I was getting messages, am I going to ask you about it? And I had to ask you about it, how long you were going to talk about it, or you may have said to me, Joe, I don't want to discuss it at all. I had no idea. But I'm glad you did, and we can now put that behind us, and and this really does put us in a good place too, because it's the concept of the International Motocross Museum. How did that actually come about? You just mentioned a moment ago that Hakan Anderson told you to do some things, and Roger, of course, has prompted you to do some things. But how long has this been going on? Where did the concept come from?
It started from probably conversations with Hakan Anderson the most. He's a very good friend. I have I have some very close friends that we talk to each other on a weekly basis, and we vacation together. I go there, they come here. And that's Hakan Anderson, Joel Robert. He's probably my best friend in the world. We are just as close as can be. And Roger DeCoster and Bob Hanna.
Okay.
I am, Bob Hanna is, him and I go way back, and so do me and Roger, actually. I met him in 74.
Yes.
But, I'm very close to these guys. We send Christmas gifts to each other, or cards, and like I said, me and Hakan Anderson and Joel Robert all took a vacation to Spain together with our wives to meet Leslie Archer. This is 8-10 years ago, and so these guys have been my core consultants. And another guy that I think really deserves a lot of credit in pushing me this way is Tom White.
Yes.
He did something similar. It was different, but he was a big mentor of mine, and I would always console with Tom White for advice, and he gave me some great advice. He told me one day, he said, whatever you do, whatever you think on the building,
Yeah.
times it by 50%. And the first building I bought, in fact, Joe, you know this, the first building I bought, remember, you were going to have a spot in it for your show.
Yes. We did talk about that.
Yeah, and that building was 46,000 square feet. And everybody liked it. It was in mint condition, beautiful building, a reasonable price. And I had the deal, I had the contract signed. We were actually having bikes delivered in there and starting to go. And then one day, it just started looking smaller and smaller every time I went over there. And so I asked for the blueprints, and we started laying it out on the floor plan. I was a builder; I could read blueprints.
Sure.
And I go, God, this thing's way too small. And so I lost my earnest money and everything. And now we're at 100,000 square feet. We've more than doubled, and hopefully that's enough. But
so the new museum, your new spot, is over 100,000 square feet.
At that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's big. And I used to build those buildings, believe me. I built plenty of tilt-ups in Southern California.
You recently acquired all of Roger DeCoster's bikes, parts, and memorabilia, including his trophies. Would you say that his display will be the largest in the museum?
Yes, by a mile. His stuff, I'd been to his house. I bought his first bike from him back in 2000. And I saw bikes and parts, and he said, you pick whatever you want for your first one, and we'll talk about the others. Mm-hmm. This is 20 years ago, and I had no idea how much stuff he had. We were 4 days at his house just packing stuff and loading the trucks.
He had all this stuff at his house, Terry?
No, he had a lot. Yeah, all the bikes were there, and a lot of the gear was there. But the trophies and the parts, most of the parts, were all out in a storage area out by KTM, out in, what is that, Temecula?
Temecula or Marietta.
Somewhere out there, yeah. So that's where all that stuff was. And one day, a few years ago, I went out there, and I go, let's go see. This is right when we were really finalizing everything. And he said to me, and I was so humbled by this, here's a guy, probably one of the most iconic guys in the history of the sport. He looks you in the eye and he says, I want you to have this. You're the one. And he gave me I bought the bikes and he donated all the rest. And it's all his gear, all those ABH leathers that you've seen in the magazines, all the helmets, the jerseys, I'd say there's 250 trophies, at least. It's crazy.
I bet it is.
And he had it all. And then I was like, how am I going to get this stuff to Chicago? So Keith McCarty helped us. Keith McCarty, the race director at Yamaha, and he was Bob Hannes. He's a very good friend of mine, really a wonderful guy. And so he had Yamaha's trucks deliver it for us.
Oh.
Yeah, because I couldn't get anybody, and none of the guys that deliver motorcycles for a living, there was like, oh, this is overwhelming. I can't, this is too much. And it was. But Keith, they have 4 53-foot semis that work 100% of the time for Yamaha, and Keith pulled that, and I had to pay for it, but, he made them available to us, and it worked out beautiful. The drivers were real nice. They were very helpful. We packed the stuff up. Nothing got damaged. It's all here, and it's in storage, and we're just really going to work hard and do our best to let the whole world see all this.
Now, what other racers have donated like their trophy collections to you, or maybe bikes for the museum?
Oh boy, Bob Hanna's been a huge contributor. We have so much of his gear and some parts, and he's pulled some strings for me. He's a very nice guy, and he really believes in this. In fact, he doesn't go to events other than for Betty Cole, who's probably his best friend, or Yamaha who hires him.
Sure.
But he's coming back here for our event, and he's right, all behind it 100%. And Jeff Stanton, there's a guy, all his stuff. Let's see, who else? Torsten Hallman.
Yeah.
We got his last Husqvarna just arrived here. I had to buy it, but he donated all the trophies and all this gear and stuff. That we got tons of that for him. I mean, like the 1962 Spanish Grand Prix trophy.
Unbelievable.
How cool is first place? Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's like going in a time warp.
Yeah, and when Roger said it will be the Smithsonian of motocross, I think he hit the nail right on the head. Terry, you were supposed to have a fundraiser scheduled for July, which has now been rescheduled to October. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that's all going to come together.
We had to reschedule it for the virus. All the riders are very excited about it. So we've got Bob Hanna, Joel Robert, Roger DeCoster. Unfortunately, Marty Smith will be there in spirit.
Yes.
Torsten Hallman, Håkan Andersson, Christer Hammergren, Jaroslav Falta, Garrett Wolsink, Taichi Yoshimura from Japan, Jeff Stanton, Warren Reed, Lars Larson, Steve Weiss, and Sylvain Gabors.
Whoa. Quite a lineup.
And maybe Heikki Mikkola.
Yeah. Hey, Terry, let me ask you this. And maybe it's like asking somebody, which one of their children are their favorites. But is there a certain bike in your collection that kind of pulls at your heartstrings more than another?
When I got Joel's bike, that would have been it. I thought that would be the last bike. But now there's so many. I mean, look at Rogers and the patina on them. They're all original. And, they just bleed history. And they take your breath away. They really do. And when two friends just came over here the other day, and they were practically in tears. I mean, these bikes haven't been seen since they were raced 45, 50 years ago. And these guys were practically in tears when they saw them. So we're going to do the best effort we can to get this thing out there and to get it as a public place. And if people want to start up with all the bitter stuff or whatever, my advice to them is have another bitter pill, because we've done it. I've been doing this for 42 years, and I've done everything on the up and up, and I'm just trying to do a noble thing. And
you're doing it, Terry. And, we all owe you a debt of gratitude for everything you've done to make this all come together for the preservation of these amazing bikes, the building, and I'd like just to thank you personally for that journey. And while we're here discussing this, I may not have your experience when it comes to exotic motorcycles, but I do believe there is an area that I could really help you with, and that's pizza. You're from
You're a New Yorker, yeah. You're gonna. Yeah. That's like the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Yeah, well, that pizza you guys have, that thick crust, it's so heavy, man. And I just want, it's like having steel and titanium. Anyway,
come
Terry.
over here, Joe. I'll take you we'll have some pizza.
All right.
Chicago deep dish all the way.
You got it, Terry. I will do that in the near future. And I want to thank you for being my guest today, for being so forthcoming with all the questions I had for you. And I'll be speaking to you in the future.
Good enough, Joe, and we're happy to help you with your show, too. So I hope good luck with that.
Well, thank you, Terry. Now that you got a bigger building, maybe I can get the powers that be together, and because that would really be the ultimate place to shoot a show like that.
Oh, you could do a show on the bikes and it would be crazy. You'd be nuts not to do it.
Terry, that was kind of my plan, and I don't want to, spill the beans here on the air, but we'll talk more about it, okay?
Good enough. Well, you take care, Joe.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Terry Good, ladies and gentlemen. It was a great interview, I thought, and his questions, his comments were absolutely wonderful, and I can't wait to speak to Terry again. Of course, I want to thank our sponsors for today. Vintco, keep the ride going. Preston Petty, the legend continues. Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. And please join me on Wednesday night for my show, Vintage Motocross Q&A, that airs on Facebook at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. For those of you that are still listening, Supercross is on. I'm going to go for now because I'm real excited about going to watch it. Thank you all for listening. This is Joe Abadi. We'll see you next time.